بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Diving into chapter 8 of النبأ العظيم, the Quranic challenge, surpassing excellence in every passage. You know, why is it that every human being, whenever they express their words, whenever they speak, whenever they write, they always have an opportunity to either omit, edit, add, but no one has ever been able to come and improve any single letter or word of the Qur'an. So that's exactly what Shaykh Draz dives into this passage. Shaykh Draz begins by saying, it's impossible to fully describe the style of the Qur'an because it's beyond imitation. It's impossible. So how could you describe something fully that is beyond imitation? If you were able to fully describe it, then it would be something that you would be able to imitate. But it is enough to say that the Qur'an combines every single literary virtue without having those virtues contradict one another. Because let's say, for example, you're very concise in your speech, but you're very expressive. That's almost impossible to do in human speech. To be concise and then expressive, how is that possible? But the Qur'an has the ability of combining virtues that are literally at times just going head to head. So that perfection is really, really deeply felt by the one who pays attention to the words and Quranic, the structure of the Qur'an. And the best way to understand the miraculous nature of the Qur'an, someone should just reflect on the limitations of human speech. These are apparent to anyone who has attempted to write a book or attempted to give a khutbah. You can clearly see the limitations of human efforts and what is found in the Qur'an. So Shaykh Draz, he gives al-qasdu fil lafz wal-wafa bihaqq al-ma'na. Okay, the struggle between conciseness and expressiveness. Okay, so there's a dilemma that writers always have. They're torn between being concise and then overly expressive. This is a very difficult balance. To be concise, where you're not just trying to meet the essay count, as the kids say, and you're also trying to fully get what you're trying to get out without being, using too many words. And Shaykh Draz, he says, like a man caught between two women. He said he's one hand here, one hand there. Mushkila. I don't. Maybe this example, fi mushkila. I don't know. Okay. I think it's possible. Allahu Akbar. So if it's concise, if it's too concise, then the meaning is sacrificed. Nuances are lost. And then he gives a few examples, like an argument. You say either believe this or don't believe it. A description, this is beautiful, this is ugly. Okay, it's not really descriptive. It's not really, there's no depth to it. It's dry. This happened, this didn't happen. Do this, don't do that. And if it's overly expressive, okay, then the writer could perhaps become verbose and he will lose the reader's interest because he's going on and on and on. And the outcome, it's either a garment that's too short and tight on you, or it's too overly baggy and too long on you. It's not perfect. It's not perfectly fit. So what gets lost in conciseness? Words of emphasis, elements of rhythm, anticipation, preliminaries. These are very important tools to catch a person's attention. And the writing ends up dry, dull, lacking impact, something sometimes unintelligible. When you look at the books of fiqh, when you look at the books of the fuqaha, they're very concise. It's like a puzzle. You're like, I don't even know what he's saying. Is he speaking to himself? It's like his own notes. At times, it's literally his own notes. Sometimes they would author things intentfully, very challenging to see, let's see if you can understand. No, seriously, some of them said, حَتَّى نَمْتَحِنَ الْعُلَمَاء مَنْ مِنْكُمُ الْعُلَمَاء, Because the alim will understand that in 1-2 words, okay, he's referring to this mas'ala. But the mas'ala, if it was truly explained, it'd be like 10 pages long, works like Kanz al-Daqaq, al-Jami' al-Kabir, Mukhtasar Khalil and the Maliki Madhab. These are works that are incredibly concise, and you're just like, what is this book? Is this a book to be read, or is this like riddles? Yeah.
What's the intention behind writing them in such a way? Right? To test the ulama, yes, but that's such a small population.
Yeah. I'm not going to go into why they would do such a thing. I think if you're going.
Is it written sometimes with the intention of no details, just about the mas'ala of wudu, it's ABCD?
See, but sometimes ABCD is not even clear because it's so too concise, overly concise to the point it becomes like a puzzle. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a problem that you find when a person is too overly concise. What happens when a person overly explains? You know, like books of tazkiyah, tasawwuf, or different things. They use too many words. They resort to all sorts of weird vocabulary, long-winded sentences, constantly repeating the same things over and over, which ironically weakens the writing. It doesn't strengthen. Yeah, it makes you lose interest. It's too long. Yeah. So even the best of writers, even if their works are edited, when their works are edited, they would likely lose half of their words without losing meaning. I'm talking about for those that extensively go, not the concise people, in their speech and in their books. Meaning that if a person were to truly write an essay or write a paper, they're like, you know what, I could summarize this. Like, you know how we're going through Sheikh Darazz's book. Sheikh Darazz's book is not Qur'an. Every time I'm like, this could easily be summarized in a few lectures.
Yeah, because he goes on and on about some things.
Yeah, this could easily be summarized, And so this is the limitation of human expression. And the Qur'an is far above and beyond that, beyond imitation. So there's always a shortcoming in human expression, Even the most refined and eloquent writers, they fail to achieve this level of perfection that is found in the Qur'an. They might have a relative excellence based on their capacity and how much they're able to get, at moments of inspiration, but it's never consistent, And to express an idea perfectly, there has to be no missing elements, there has to be no unnecessary additions, and there has to be no room for improvement. That's impossible in human speech or human efforts. And even if a writer reviews his own work, even after 70 times of reading it, he'll always find flaws. My work and your work will never be perfect. So you cannot desire perfection. You can just desire to get better, but there'll always be a chance to reword, change phrases, reorganize your thoughts, put chapter 1 to 3 to 3 to 1. It's a long process. There's no such thing as perfection. I've sat through many times. My sheikh has written many books, and every single time we read it again. There's always additions. There's always addition 1, addition 2, addition 3, addition 4, addition 5, addition 6. And a person who's chasing kamal, you'll spend your whole life chasing it. You're never gonna.
So there's an interesting thing about Imam Shafi about al-Risala. He says the same thing. Every time he went to read it and rewrite it, there were mistakes, there were corrections that were needed.
Al-kamalu lillah.
After he did it, 20 or 30 times or whatever, he decided only the book of Allah is perfect.
Jameel. That's a new fa'idah from Jameel. He gives the example of Zuhayd with his the annuals, al-hawliyat. Every year he would review them, the poems that he had. Every year he would review them. See, even in their poetry, they would change. You could maybe change this a little bit, add this here, remove this here. You can always improve. Qur'an, no one has been able to even add a single word in a place of a Qur'anic word. So the Qur'an captures this struggle perfectly. It's like someone holding out his hands, asking for water. Habibi, ishrab, make a cup. It's impossible. You'll never be able to do so. So there's a double burden that's expected: precision, and then also conciseness. Conciseness. If achieving one goal is difficult, then imagine achieving two conflicting goals at the same time. You're trying to be concise, but at the same time you're trying to express whatever is fully supposed to be intended. So there's depth to it, but it's also concise. And Shaykh Daraz in the next chapter, he even talks about how the Qur'an is ijazun kulluhu, that the Qur'an is never extra. There's not a single word that you could put in place, adding to the Qur'an or remove. Like it's ijazun kulluhu. We'll get into it in the next chapter. We'll go talk about that deeper then. So the human mind is bound by limitation. If you aim for one goal, you're walking away from another. You aim for conciseness, you're walking away from precision and depth. You're walking towards depth, you're walking away from conciseness. It's a very, very difficult balance. It's like there are two goalposts and you're either walking away from this one or you're walking away from this one. It's very difficult to strike that perfect balance which is found in the Qur'an. And if a writer were to do so, then it would be at maximum in a few lines of what they have written. They might have excellency, and you find this very often in poets, like, for example, Mutanabbi. There are lines of his, you're like, wow, amazing. And then there are other lines, whatever. And then there are other lines like, did he even write, Mutanabbi wrote this? Yeah, there are, when you look at some of the greatest poets in history, you'll find that they have some lines that are just like bangers. And then others are like, what's going on here? Like, is this the same guy who wrote that line? I don't think so. There's no way, It's like when you and I, Dr. Awad could perhaps, say like, not every khutbah is going to be the same. Some khutbahs are really going to hit, some khutbahs are not going to be as good. It's just impossible to have constantly 10 out of 10. Mustahil. Humans are limited, And that's just a simple khutbah, let alone, something like the Qur'an. So a writer, he might do it once or twice, but then, as Shaykh says, the brilliance will fade, the shine, it dulls away, the style weakens. It's like finding a gold nugget in a mountain of stone. Yeah, there's that one gold nugget, but there's the whole mountain of stone as well, So at best, only a few lines will meet that standard. But the Qur'an from the beginning, min Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin, all the way until min Jinnati wan Nas, it meets that standard completely. So subhanAllah, Qur'an is entirely unlike human speech because every line of the Qur'an maintains clarity, conciseness, precision, complete elegance, depth, and then each word is purposefully placed. Each harf, each word, each sentence structure, it's each order of every ayah. Everything is in its perfect place, serving a specific function. كل كلمة عاشقة لمحلها. And even the flow of it is done so seamlessly, where verse to verse, section to section, idea to idea. This is found beautifully in the Qur'an. So there's no way anybody can come and omit or expand the Qur'an. Kitabun uhkimat ayatuhu is going to come later even as well. The Shaykh gives a challenge. He said, try this challenge. Cover any page of the Qur'an with your hand and start to count the numbers of words underneath. Count. Do, let's say 100, okay? Now select the number of words of the best of speech, the best of poetry, the best of prose from human speech, excluding Qur'an. And then compare the depth of it, the clarity of it, and the richness of meaning with the conciseness of speech. It's impossible to meet the same standard. The Qur'an, a mufassir will take literally one page of the Qur'an and can dive into it for 20, 30 pages because of how deep the Qur'an is. Even the Prophet ﷺ, if you were to take his speech and he is khayru khalqillah and he's the one, the Qur'an unzila ala qalbi, if you were to take his speech that is attributed to him ﷺ with hadith, let's say like 100 words of that and 100 words of Qur'an, you'll see a clear difference because Qur'an is kalamullah azza wa jal. The Prophet ﷺ, he's bashar yuha ilayh. There's a statement of Ibn Atiyah. He says, if we were to scan the entire Arabic language for a single word that could replace even a single word of the Qur'an, expressing the same meaning or expressing it better, we would find none. Really, I mean, if a person were to try to take this as a challenge upon themselves, like find any word in the Qur'an, you're like, well, you know what? Let me see what could be better placed here. There's nothing. You know how many times we've dived in, we go into like the deep vocabulary of words in our tafsir classes and different, and we're like, wow, the choice here of the word, nothing else could be here. Literally, nothing else.
We were reading Tabaraka, we're looking at the word adab al-sa'ir. So this is about the jinns. Their punishment in the hellfire is a specific word instead of jahannam, nar. Why sa'ir, why not nar? So we dived into that word and we understood that, Muhammad, correct me if I'm wrong, it is used only for the jinn.
Allahu alam, I don't know. I didn't look into that. Adab al-Sa'id?
Yes.
I'll look into that. That's a good point. Who mentioned that? Brother Nail?
And Brazil.
They found only one example where it wasn't for jinn.
Allahu
One
alam.
example,
There was an example, I think the person you mentioned where it wasn't jinn.
Yeah. But the majority of times, every time it was about the jinn.
I mean, the different surahs that I've covered, Nur, Hujurat, Insan, Saf, and now Nuh, every single time, each word, nothing could be removed and anything else can be put in its place. Mustahil. Nothing. كتاب أحكمت آياته ألف لام را كتاب أحكمت آياته ثم فصلت من لدن حكيم خبير. أحكمت, this book is perfected. It's flawless. Okay, in structure and in meaning. فصلت. So it's also كتاب أحكمت وَفُصِّلَت. It's kind of fitting how it's concise and expressive. فُصِّلَت. It's been explained, expounded completely. مِن لَدُنْ حَكِيمٍ خَبِيرٍ. Allah Azza wa Jalla, all-wise, who leaves no flaws. And Khabir, who's aware of every single detail and every nuance. So nothing is left behind. That's the beautiful part of it. So now Shaykh Daraz goes into another thing that the Qur'an is able to address al-khassa wal-amma. Khitab al-khassa wal-amma. You know how hard it is to give a speech and at the same time you're delivering to children and you're delivering to elders and you're delivering to scholars? You perhaps, and I do this often in my own dars, if I see in the audience, I'm like, okay, there's a shaykh, and then there's like, general uncles and whatnot. So I will intentionally say a point or two that I know that which would catch the scholar's interest, because he'll appreciate the book, he'll appreciate the date, he'll appreciate the nuances. And then I'll go back to normal speech where I'm addressing uncles, and then I'll go back and say another point. You cannot, and then they're not understanding this part, and he's gonna be like, oh, this is like, what am I doing here? And so the Qur'an has the ability to speak to the intellectual elite, and at the same time the ability to address the general public. It's so amazing. As humans, we're only able to speak to one group at a time, but the Qur'an relates to all audiences with the same words. It addresses all of them. وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ
I have
لِلذِّكْرِ.
an interesting comment about this.
Yeah.
So when you look at the biblical writings, like the Gospel according to Mark, the Gospel according to Luke, and so on, each one of them writes in a style depending on where they lived. One of them lived among people who were elite and educated, so he writes it in a different language. The other one lived among the poor masses, so the language is different.
The different Gospels.
Yes, but it's talking about the life of Jesus, so this is why it could never be the word of God what they're writing. So people change.
Do they even claim it to be the word of God?
Well, they do.
They don't, right?
Yeah, they do.
Oh my
They
God.
say it's the word of God.
Or inspired, or
Oh,
gonna follow.
Jesus, the word of Jesus, who they claim to be God.
Subhanallah,
So
majal.
there was those variations in the Bible. Now what you're saying about the perfection of the Quran.
Yeah, the ability to address all of them. Yeah,
Yes.
it's amazing.
The poor and the rich, the educated and the uneducated. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not over-explaining to the intellectual where they get offended.
Yes.
And it's not confusing those that are not able to understand it at such depth. Like the Quranic meaning, if you're a general Muslim and you read it, you tafham. But if you're a scholar, you understand the depth of it, you get to break it down, you get to understand how, you get to look into it with a deeper lens. The more tools you have, the more you're able to, dissect really the Quran. So, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. Now Shaykh Daraz goes into another thing. How the humans are always pulled by two internal drives. Aql and atifa. Aql, their intellect, seeking truth, seeking meaning, and their atifa, their feelings, which respond to pleasure, to pain, to beauty, And so the ideal style, the real miraculous style, must be able to address the mind and its reasoning, it's the aql, and also the heart and the feelings, the atifa. Okay? Like a bird flying with two wings. The balance is everything. Aql and atifa at the same time. Now when you look at the examples of speech of humans and human efforts, when you look at scientists and philosophers, they're appealing to logic, but they're very dry. And then you look at poets, there's no truth, or sometimes there might be truth to it, but majority of the time they're just all about emotion, and there's no truth to it. Allah Azza wa Jalla says about them, وَالشُّعَرَاء يَتَّبِعُهُمُ الْغَاوُونَ. He said the poets, they are followed merely by deviants. أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَهِيمُونَ. Do you not see how they rove aimlessly in each valley? اليوم يتكلم عن حب, اليوم يتكلم عن خمر, اليوم يتكلم كذا. The poets, it's like the music of today, same thing, There's no truth to it, there's no depth to it, it's just feelings.
Music today, there is no even sense.
Yeah, there's no even sense today.
Nothing.
Nothing, and then they listen to it. وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ, and they say what they don't do. وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ. When you look at the example, of Mutanabbi and how brave they were in their poetry. How brave they were in their poetry. وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَذَكَرُوا اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا وَانْتَصَرُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَوْتِهِ. Except those who believe, طبعا. Yeah. So that's why Rasulullah ما كان شاعرا. The Prophet was not a شاعر. Imam al-Shafi'i, he could have even go further in شعر, but هو من العلماء الأئمة الفضلاء. So شأنه ليس شأن الشعراء. The shu'ara are in a wadi and the ulama are in a wadi. You know, but you benefit from shi'r because you need it for lugha and whatnot. Yeah. So even within ourselves, when we think deeply, our emotions will retreat. We'll be extremely logical, especially men. When they start to think very logical, it's as though their emotions are depleted. They think like engineers, like just everything like A, B, C, D. And you find women have the more sense of atifa. And so when we feel very strongly, you find that the intellect is subdued. It's very difficult to find that balance. You know, it's either one is being dominant or the other. It's impossible to have that perfect balance of intellect, aql, and atifa. The Qur'an does that. Allah Azza wa Jalla says about the human, the man, مَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِرَجُلٍ مِّن قَلْبَيْنِ فِي جَوْفِهِ. God has not placed two hearts in the chest of any man. So our mood will always be reflected in our speech. If we're feeling very rigid, halas, it's going to be like this guy's very precise. He's like being a math guy. And if we're feeling emotional, you're going to see the pain, you're going to see the beauty in the speech. It's either this or that. The Qur'an, the miracle book, is able to simultaneously talk and address the intellect and address the heart and the emotion. Address the intellect of a person and the emotion, subhanallah. Bismillah. Naam. Yeah, so continues to talk about the difference between when you evaluate human writing, you can kind of sense what mood the writer was in at the time he was writing it. If he is, overly driven by his feelings, that he was going through some emotional problems. Or if, it's true, yeah. HR, they look at these types of things too. Or if a person is just being, then it's like the intellectual side has come in. So it's very difficult to strike that balance. I mean, in our own lives, we know this to be true. For those that are married, you have to find that perfect balance between not being too overly emotional and then not being completely emotionally cut off. Like you have to find that perfect balance.
So Sheikh, during interviews, HR, some of the questions they have designed is to test the emotions of people.
Subhanallah.
Their character, which side they lean of things. And then, of course, their intellectual abilities, as far as that job is concerned.
No.
But they're designed to test all those things.
Wow.
You cannot ask one question or two and think you'll capture all that. It's a series of questions you have to
Subhanallah.
possibly.
Subhanallah.
Yeah.
It's powerful. So to maintain both logical rigor and emotional resonance at the same time is absent in human expression. It's absent. To have both at the same time simultaneously is absent. But the Qur'an alone is able to address both. Two things going in two opposite directions or going opposite to one another, and the Qur'an is able to address both. Just like the conciseness and the depth. Same thing over here, the Qur'an is able to address the heart, the aql and the atifa. So it presents truths for those that are looking for intellectual arguments, and it presents it from a way that can address your heart at the same time. This is found throughout the Qur'an. It's like a solid tree, but it's bearing fruits. It's bearing, it has plants, it has flowers. So it's a solid tree that's able to do all of that at the same time. And this harmony is only possible because Allah Azza wa Jal is the one, this is His kalam. This is kalamullah Azza wa Jal, the one الَّذِي يَغْلِبُ وَلَا يُغْلَبُ. Nothing can overwhelm Him Azza wa Jal. Then he gives an example of two surahs. He says Surah Yusuf, Surah Qasas. You could derive so many lessons from it, so many, even perhaps in some instances, rulings, from it. And it's not like any history book where you're just going scene from scene to scene, but it's as though it captures your heart in it. When you read Surah Yusuf, and the story of Musa alayhi salam and Surah Qasas, it literally, your heart is in the story. Your heart is literally in the story. That's why many people, when they read Surah Yusuf bil-faham, yabkun, they all cry. Yeah, because it catches your heart. Subhanallah. The Qur'an has the ability to move the skin and the soul. الله نزل أحسن الحديث كتابا متشابها مثانية تقشعر منه جلود الذين يخشون ربهم ثم تلين جلودهم وقلوبهم إلى ذكر الله. Allah has sent down the best of speech, a consistent book. Kitab al-Mutashab, repeating its themes, causing the skins of those who fear their lords to shiver. إِنَّهُ لَقَوْلٌ فَصْلٌ وَمَا هُوَ بِالْهَزْلِ. One example Shaykh Daraz gives is one where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He addresses a very important logical proof of the rububiyyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the tawheed of Allah. لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. If there are more than one, if there are several gods and they're not contradicting one another and they're all acting in the same way, then there has to be one that's just redundant. There's no use of that second God then. If they're all able, they're all powerful, all this, that, then the second one must be redundant, and that's above God to be redundant. And if they are not in agreement, then you would see fasad fil khalq. But if there's one system, one creation, one everything, that means it has to be one creator, But then how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do it? Just from a logical perspective, in a logical way, like philosophers speak? No. فَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَرْشِ عَمَّا يَصِفُونَ. He addresses the mind and He addresses the heart. Subhanallah. And it's delivered in such a beautiful way. لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتها فسبحان الله رب العرش عما يصفون. Where will you find philosophers speaking in such a way? And then he gives an example of legal rulings. Look at Surah Al-Talaq. Surah Al-Talaq, ahkam fiqhiyah. Surah Al-Talaq, ahkam fiqhiyah. But Allah Azza wa Jal is able to put in the verses a way to make a person have taqwa of Allah. وَمَن يَتَقِ اللَّهَ وَمَن يَتَقِ اللَّهَ وَمَن يَتَقِ اللَّهَ. And then Surah Al-Qisas, the ayah of Qisas. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Believers. Look, immediately beginning it, you are believers, then you better be acting properly. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِصَاصُ فِي الْقَتْلَى talks about qisas and the legal vengeance and whatnot. الْحُرُّ بِالْحُرِّ وَالْعَبْدُ بِالْعَبْدِ وَالْأُنْثَى بِالْأُنْثَى فَمَنْ عُفِيَ لَهُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ. Allah Azza wa Jal eases the tension by mentioning he's your brother. Make sure you do what? فَاتِّبَاعٌ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. In fairness. What? وَأَدَاءٌ إِلَيْهِ بِإِحْسَانٍ. With ihsan. وَذَلِكَ تَخْفِيفٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَرَحْمَةٌ. Talking about the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His takhfif. And then فَمَنِ اعْتَدَى بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ فَلَهُ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. And then ends with a strong warning. So the Qur'an is giving you ahkam fiqhiyah, but it's also addressing your heart. And the subject is what? Murder and legal justice. But the verse is full of mercy, it's full of reminder, it's full of something that captures your emotion. And any human being who tries to blend the legal and the spiritual, the logical and the emotional, they'll always be disjointed. They're always going to be either one or the other, or leaning towards one and ignoring the other. This is always the case, either too much emotion or too much intellect. It's like a patched garment after a tear. But the Qur'an is seamless. It's woven by the Lord. Kitabun uhkimat ayatuhu. Subhanallah. Everything is perfect by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, that is until where I had prepared, inshallah ta'ala. The next lesson we'll finish chapter 8, bi'awnillahi ta'ala, inshallah.
So one thing I wanted to add is that in scientific writing and when people apply for research funding, they have to put together a very concise document as a grant application. Through the years, things were trimmed down because people would write many pages. Others were incapable of writing that. So now people are being forced to say, well, the page on the summary of your project should be no more than 200 words. And the challenge is putting all your ideas of your research into those 200 words, And people would sit for hours reviewing that, giving somebody else to read it, the specialist to review it, to make sure conciseness in language is there. And so, again, measuring words in few words, but human mind thoughts, in few